The secret room beneath the church. The shock. If you believe that holiness always hides purity, you've never heard this story. Subscribe, and let's begin. The morning of April 5, 1980, began with the hollow ring of church bells echoing through Toledo's Mercy Hospital chapel. The sun had barely touched the stained glass windows when the discovery was made, something so unholy, it silenced the very place meant for prayer. Sister Margaret and Paul was found lying at the foot of the altar. Her white habit was neatly arranged, as if by reverent hands, but her face told a story of struggle. The crucifix necklace she wore was twisted, pressed deep into her skin. On the floor beside her were faint traces of wax and a single drop of blood shaped like a tear. When the first officers entered, the chapel smelled of incense and iron. A young nurse stood near the doorway, trembling. "It was Father Robinson who called it in," she whispered. "He said he found her like this." Father Gerald Robinson, 50 years old, quiet, respected, always in black, stood in the shadows of the confessional booth. His hands were folded, his eyes heavy with grief. "God forgive whoever did this," he murmured. "This is not a man's doing. It's something darker." Detective Frank Delaney wasn't a man who scared easily. A veteran of the Toledo Police Department, he'd seen drug killings, family murders, the worst of human sin. But this crime scene felt different. It wasn't rage, it was ritual. Every detail seemed deliberate, the candle positions, the folded linen, the absence of fingerprints. Even the stab wounds, 9, in a precise circular pattern over her chest, looked symbolic. "This isn't random," Delaney said to his partner. "Someone performed this." When Robinson was asked to lead the funeral mass for Sister Margaret 3 days later, no one objected. The congregation wept, the choir sang, and the man suspected by some, though never accused, delivered her eulogy with trembling grace. "She was purity in its truest form," Robinson said, his voice cracking. "And the devil envies purity." The police couldn't find a weapon. They couldn't find motive, witnesses, or evidence, only whispers. Some staff claimed they'd heard footsteps beneath the chapel late at night. Others swore the basement door was sometimes locked, sometimes not. One janitor told detectives he once saw Robinson carrying candles and books into the basement after midnight. When asked what he was doing, the priest simply replied, "Cleansing." But without proof, the case went cold. The church remained silent. The file was marked unsolved. 24 years passed. By 2004, Toledo had changed. The old Mercy Hospital chapel was nearly forgotten, its once vibrant walls faded, its confessionals unused. Father Robinson, now retired, lived quietly in a small house near the Maumee River. But silence has a strange way of rotting from the inside out. That year, a woman named Helen Haskins contacted the police. She was in her 50s, a former nurse at the hospital back in 1980. Her voice on the recorded call trembled. "You need to reopen that case," she said. "Sister Margaret didn't die because of a stranger. She died because she found something she shouldn't have." Detective Michael Harden, newly assigned to cold cases, took the file. He found dust, faded photographs, and something that didn't sit right, a report mentioning ritual-like markings on the altar cloth that had never been entered into evidence. It was marked missing 3 days after the murder. He went to see Father Robinson. The priest's house was immaculate, bookshelves of theology, framed certificates, and the faint smell of candle wax. Robinson, now in his 70s, welcomed him warmly. "The past is a dangerous thing to chase, detective," he said with a small smile. "Sometimes God hides what man should not find." But Harden wasn't a man of faith, he was a man of patterns. And the patterns here were wrong. 2 weeks later, during a court-approved search of Robinson's home, officers opened a drawer in his study that had been locked tight. Inside, wrapped in a linen cloth, was a set of ritual books, one titled The Roman Ritual of Exorcism, another handwritten and bound in black leather. Between them was a letter opener shaped like a miniature dagger, its tip darkened by time. On the hilt, engraved faintly, was a small cross. Lab results would later confirm, the metal matched the puncture pattern found on Sister Margaret's body. But there was something else, a folded sheet of paper in Robinson's handwriting, marked with a single sentence. The door beneath the altar must never be opened. Hardin returned to the chapel, now abandoned, its pews covered in dust and silence. He found the trapdoor beneath the altar, hidden under a layer of old carpeting. When he pried it open, a breath of cold air escaped like an exhale from the earth itself. A narrow staircase led down into the dark. The light from his flashlight caught old brick, spider webs, and something carved into the wall, a Latin phrase. In tenebris lucet lux. The light shines in the darkness. At the bottom was a small stone room, about 10 feet wide, with a wooden table in the center. On the table lay melted candle stubs, an iron crucifix turned upside down, and pages torn from a Bible arranged in a circle. And in the corner, chained to the wall, was a single rosary, its beads blackened, as if burned. Hardin stared in silence. Every hair on his arm stood up. He whispered to his partner, "No one builds a room like this for prayer." When Robinson was brought in for questioning, he denied everything. Calmly. Politely. "That room has nothing to do with me," he said. "You think faith is a costume, detective. But sometimes the costume is the only thing keeping the darkness contained." Hardin slid a photo of the letter opener across the table. "We found this in your house." Robinson looked at it for a long moment. Then he smiled faintly. "Then I suppose you've already opened the door." "What door?" Hardin asked. The priest leaned forward, his eyes suddenly sharp. "The one you should have left shut." And with that, he said nothing else. Later that night, Hardin sat in his car outside the old chapel, the case files spread across the passenger seat. The wind carried faint echoes of bells from somewhere distant. He thought about the Latin words carved in the stone, "The light shines in the darkness." But what if the darkness had been living inside the light all along? He took one last look at the chapel before driving off, unaware that the next morning, a groundskeeper would discover something new. A fresh set of footprints leading to the trapdoor. And on the altar above it, someone had placed a single burning candle, lit, though the chapel had been locked for decades. The spiral. Detective Michael Hardin didn't sleep that night. The image of that secret room, the blackened rosary, the inverted crucifix, the words carved into the wall, looped in his mind like a curse. By morning, he was sitting in the precinct, staring at crime scene photos laid out across his desk. He'd handled cold cases before, but this one felt alive, like it was watching him back. His partner, Detective Linda Hale, walked in carrying a box of evidence from the 1980 investigation. "You're not going to believe this," she said, setting it down. "The original altar cloth from Sister Margaret's murder? It was logged as missing. But the inventory sheet says it was checked out, by Father Robinson himself. 3 days after the killing." Hardin's jaw tightened. "He checked out the murder evidence?" "Yeah. Under the guise of religious examination. The department just let him take it." They both stared at the old black and white photo of Sister Margaret, lying beneath the altar's shadow. Hardin muttered, "He buried something, and not just her." That afternoon, they brought in forensic specialist Dr. Elaine Corwin to analyze the ritual books. Her gloved hands turned the fragile pages carefully. "This isn't just theology," she said. "Some of these markings are occult symbols, adapted from medieval rituals. It looks like someone was blending Catholic rites with older, darker ceremonies. See this?" She pointed to a sketch in the margins, a circular symbol with 9 small crosses. "These align exactly with the 9 stab wounds on Sister Margaret." Hardin felt the hairs on his neck stand. "You're telling me the murder was ritualistic?" "I'm telling you it was deliberate," she replied. And whoever did it believed it meant something. The next day, Hardin received an anonymous envelope at his desk. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, black and white. It showed the interior of the secret room beneath the chapel. But there was something new in this version, something he hadn't seen when he was there. A figure. Standing in the corner. Cloaked, head bowed, barely visible in the shadows. On the back of the photo, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "He's not the only one." Hardin's stomach dropped. "Someone else has been down there," he said aloud. That night, he returned to the chapel with Linda. The old hospital had been sold years ago, now used for storage, its corridors echoing with dripping pipes and hollow wind. The air inside was freezing. They descended into the secret room again. The candle that had been burning on the altar was gone, but a circle of wax still stained the table. Linda scanned the walls with her flashlight. "You ever think maybe we shouldn't be down here?" Hardin didn't answer. He was kneeling by the table, inspecting the wax residue. His beam caught something new carved into the stone, fresh, jagged lines etched into the wall beside the Latin inscription. He leaned closer. The letters were in English this time. "Confess or burn." The scrape marks were still clean, as if carved only hours ago. Linda stepped back, her hand instinctively reaching for her holster. "Mike, someone's been here recently." Before he could respond, a sound echoed through the corridor above them, a door slamming. Then footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Hardin whispered, "Lights off." They stood in darkness, breaths shallow, listening. The footsteps moved closer to the trapdoor above, then stopped. After a long silence, something scraped against the floorboards, metal dragging on wood. Then the faint creak of the trapdoor hinge. Hardin lifted his gun. The door cracked open an inch. But instead of a face, something else dropped through the gap, an object that landed with a hollow thud at their feet. A crucifix. Carved into its base were the initials SMP. Sister Margaret Paul. Linda whispered, "What the hell is happening?" Hardin picked up the crucifix, his pulse hammering. It was smeared with dust and a faint reddish residue, old blood, maybe. "This was hers," he said. "They took it from the crime scene. Someone's returning evidence." The next morning, news broke that Father Robinson had been found unconscious in his home. His neighbor reported hearing loud noises and called for help. When Hardin arrived at the hospital, Robinson was awake, pale, his voice rasping. "You've brought it back," he whispered. "The candle, the crucifix, the door doesn't close once it's open." Hardin leaned in. "Who's he, Father? Who's not the only one?" Robinson's eyes glistened. "There were others. Not priests. Not holy men. They came to me, they said it was for protection. They wanted to cleanse what was buried beneath the chapel. But purity," he said, trembling, "purity attracts envy. It always does." Hardin pressed him. "Names. Give me names." Robinson looked toward the window. "You'll find them in the parish records. The ones who served at Mercy in 1980. Before Hardin could ask more, the heart monitor spiked. Robinson's body seized violently. Nurses rushed in, shouting. Within seconds, the beeping flattened into a single tone. Father Gerald Robinson was gone. Back at the precinct, Hardin and Linda combed through the parish archives. Most of the names matched priests, volunteers, and nurses, but one stood out. Brother Thomas Keller. He'd been listed as an assistant chaplain at Mercy in 1980, then abruptly reassigned to another parish. A year later, he vanished. No forwarding address, no record of resignation. Just gone. Linda frowned. "Guess where his last recorded address was?" Hardin looked up. "Don't tell me." She nodded. the rectory next door to this chapel. They tracked Keller's trail to a small town 2 hours outside Toledo. The church there was abandoned, its windows shattered, ivy crawling up its walls. Inside, they found the pews overturned and candles melted into warped puddles. In the front pew lay a single file folder. Inside were photographs, old, faded, but unmistakable. They showed the chapel basement, the table, the markings. In one of them, Father Robinson stood beside a second man, partially turned from the camera. His face was shadowed, but his hands were clasped over an open book. Linda flipped the photo over. A note was scrawled in the same handwriting as the photo from the envelope. He was never the leader. Before they could process what that meant, a sound echoed from the back of the church, soft, rhythmic, like something dragging across stone. Hardin motioned for silence. They moved toward the sacristy door, flashlights low. The smell of dust and wax filled the air. The door creaked open, and behind it was another staircase. Narrow. Leading down. Hardin exhaled. Another one, he whispered. As they descended, the air grew colder. On the final step, their lights caught something that made both of them stop. A row of wooden chairs. Each one facing an altar. Each one with a small name tag. The first tag read Sister Margaret Paul. The second, Thomas Keller. The third was blank. Linda raised her light higher, and froze. The walls were covered in photographs. Dozens of them. Victims, clergy, nuns, hospital staff, all pinned in neat rows. And in the center, under a flickering candle, was a new photograph. Detective Michael Hardin. He felt his stomach twist. Someone had been watching. Someone knew he was coming. Linda's voice cracked. "Mike, this isn't over." He turned toward the staircase, but the trapdoor above them had just slammed shut. A shadow moved across the crack of light. Then, faintly, the sound of a voice, calm, steady, and disturbingly familiar. It whispered, "You opened the door, detective. Now you belong in the room." The reckoning. Darkness swallowed the basement of the abandoned church. The trapdoor above had slammed shut, sealing Detective Michael Hardin and Linda Hale in the suffocating cold. Their flashlights flickered, beams cutting through the dust and shadows that seemed to breathe on their own. "Mike," Linda's voice trembled. "There's no handle on the inside." Hardin climbed the stone steps, pounding the wood above with his fist. "Hey! Who's up there?" No reply. Only the faint echo of dripping water somewhere beyond the walls. Then, a sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps above them. Each one creaked the floorboards like a countdown. Linda stepped back, flashlight trembling in her hand. That voice, it sounded like Robinson. "He's dead," Hardin snapped. "Then who said it?" Hardin's beam swept the room, landing on the photographs pinned to the walls. The candlelight made their faces seem to shift, to breathe. Every photo had a small symbol drawn in red ink beneath it, 9 crosses forming a circle. The same symbol carved into Sister Margaret's chest. Hardin's eyes caught something on the altar, another folder, freshly placed. He opened it, revealing a newspaper clipping. "Retired priest dies during questioning, Toledo clergy in shock." And below it, a handwritten note, "Death is never the end of confession." Linda swallowed hard. "Mike, whoever's doing this isn't done. They're trying to finish what started in 1980. Using a crowbar from a supply rack, Hardin forced open a vent panel behind the altar. A narrow tunnel stretched beyond, barely wide enough to crawl through. "Let's move," he said. "That trapdoor's locked from outside. This might be the only way out." They crawled through the passage, their lights bouncing off walls of damp stone. The tunnel twisted downward before ending at another chamber, smaller, circular, almost like a well. In the center was a stone pedestal. On it rested a thick leather-bound book. Its cover bore the same Latin phrase carved into the first basement wall, in tenebris lucet lux. The light shines in the darkness. Hardin opened it. The pages were filled with entries, dates, confessions, names. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. Each entry listed a participant and a sacrifice. April 1980, MAP, cleansing successful. May 1981, TK, initiate lost. Door sealed. Linda leaned over his shoulder. TK, Thomas Keller. Hardin flipped further. The most recent entry was dated just 2 weeks ago. October 14, 2004, MH, door reopened. Balance pending. Linda's breath caught. MH, Michael Hardin. He stared at the page, heart pounding. They knew I'd come. Before I even opened the case file. Suddenly, a metallic click echoed behind them. They turned. Standing at the tunnel entrance was a man, hooded, tall, his hands clasped around a silver cross. His voice was calm, deep, almost serene. "You were chosen, detective," he said. "You opened the door again. The light demands balance." Hardin aimed his gun. "Don't move." The man didn't flinch. "You can't shoot Faith." Linda stepped forward. "Who are you?" He lowered his hood. His face was older, lined, but unmistakable. "Brother Thomas Keller," he said softly. The ritual never ended. Robinson only kept the darkness contained. But when he died, it came back, through you. Hardin's grip tightened on the gun. "You killed Sister Margaret." "No," Keller said, his eyes glinting. "She offered herself. To seal the door forever." Robinson lost his courage. He buried the truth. But sin buried is sin reborn. He reached into his robe and held up a candle, lighting it with a match that flared in the darkness. "This is the last cleansing. The 9th and final circle." Linda's hand went to her weapon. "Drop it." But Keller didn't move. He began to chant softly in Latin, the words echoing against the stone walls. The candlelight flickered violently, casting twisted shadows across the ceiling. Hardin felt the temperature plummet. The flame turned blue. "Mike," Linda whispered, "something's." The candle suddenly exploded, glass shattering, light swallowing the room in blinding white. When the flash cleared, Keller was gone. The book on the pedestal was open again, to a new page. October 15, 2004, LH, witness secured. Linda's initials. She stumbled backward, panic rising. "Mike, that wasn't here before. That wasn't here." Hardin grabbed her hand. "We're getting out of here." They scrambled up the tunnel until they reached a rusted grate. Hardin kicked it open, emerging into an alley behind the church. The night air hit like ice. Both were shaking. Linda gasped for breath. What the hell was that? Hardin looked back at the tunnel opening. "I don't know. But I'm burning that place down." The next morning, the site was sealed and excavation crews brought in under police order. Hardin watched as workers began digging under the chapel floor. Within hours, they found bones. Dozens of them. All arranged in circular patterns. A coroner later confirmed, not all of them were from 1980. Some dated back decades. And each skull had a small cross carved into the forehead. Linda stood beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. So it wasn't one murder. It was a cycle. Hardin nodded. A ritual. Every generation, someone kept it alive. That night, Hardin returned home to find his front door slightly open. His instincts flared, gun drawn, flashlight sweeping through the dark living room. Everything looked untouched, until he reached his desk. On top of the case files lay the leather-bound ledger. It was open again, to a new final entry. November 2, 2004, the light shines in the darkness. The detective confesses. His breath froze. He hadn't written that. Before he could react, the phone rang. He picked it up, his hand shaking. Hardin. A woman's voice answered. Soft. Calm. Detective Hardin, it's time for your confession. The line went dead. 3 days later, Linda went to check on him after he failed to report in. His car was still in the driveway. His lights were on. The house was quiet, too quiet. In his study, the desk was empty. The ledger was gone. But beneath it lay a note, written in Hardin's handwriting. The door beneath the altar must never be opened. On the floor, faintly traced in candle wax, were 9 small crosses. A month later, the church was demolished. The site was converted into a memorial park. But visitors still report strange things, candles relighting themselves, Latin words carved into new stone overnight, whispers in the wind saying the same phrase. In tenebris lucet lux. The light shines in the darkness. But maybe, Hardin would have said, the light was never really light at all. If you think this story was intense, wait till you hear the next one. Subscribe so you don't miss it.